Professor Reeder, Madison fervently believed in creating this sort of broad view of and really kind of deliberate idea around this system, this governing system of America. What were the results of that in his life that brought him to those conclusions, to sort of write the words, but then sort of ignore the reality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I look at Madison, I think, and when we think about the deliberative system that he created, and the and the republic and the democratic republic, he would have just called it a republic in his time. But when you look at the system that he created, Madison had a few things in mind, and one of the main things that he wanted to create was a system that worked in diversity, a system that worked with diversity and that made diversity an asset rather than a liability, because Madison was a very different type of thinker than a lot of political philosophers of his time. The political wisdom of the time was, you cannot create a republic that is so broad, covers so many square miles, so much landmass, and is so diverse as the United States, as these new United States were. Republics, again, this is conventional wisdom, republics work much better in small groups, in homogeneous groups. Otherwise, it's just going to fracture, and it's going to fall apart, and it's going to dissolve too quickly. Madison turns that reasoning on his head. Now, we have to say from the outset, as we've obviously been talking, but I think it's worth stating the obvious, Madison obviously saw diversity in different terms than we do now. And obviously, he enslaved individuals, but that's not to say that early America wasn't diverse. They didn't think in terms of racial diversity or in terms of the body politic, of gender diversity, and so forth. But that doesn't mean they were just a big homogenous group of white men who were voting. They were different in terms of religion, of their regionalism, and sometimes even languages that they spoke, nationalities. They were diverse in all sorts of ways. And Madison looked across this broad spectrum, and he said, this is actually what will make the republic work, is this diversity. I don't want to get too Pollyanna about this, but he did say that it's going to be, he essentially said it's going to be the United States diversity that makes it work. Why? Because all of these different groups are going to be vying for power. They'll more or less follow their self-interest, but we can actually make that self-interest work for the United States, make it a part of the system, because nobody can get an oppressive majority. That's one thing that he's really worried about. As opposed to these, smaller, more homogenous republics, you can have a majority. If you're not in the majority in this small homogenous group, life is going to be really, really difficult for you. And so he said, actually, this is going to work much better across this broad, diverse republic. And again, he thought of diversity very differently than we do. But I think that we can take lessons from the way that he originally thought about the republic and incorporate them into our political culture today. And I think that, now this didn't end up working out the way that Madison imagined it would. I mean, Madison, he would have called them factions. Today we'd call them political parties. Right. We don't need to spend too much time on the finite differences between the two, but he imagined a lot of different parties that are going to be vying for power. And the problem is, and he didn't really realize this at the time, with the structure, especially from the Electoral College, the structure that was built into the Constitution, when you say that a presidential candidate, for instance, needs 50% plus one of the electoral votes to be elected, that's going to give all of these small coalitions an incentive to say, well, we may not agree on a lot of things, but let's actually conglomerate into like two big, just two main parties and create a two-party system, each vying for that precious 50% plus one. And so it didn't turn out the way that Madison imagined. But I don't think that we need to turn our backs on what Madison originally thought. And we can think about today, how does diversity continue to be an inherent benefit to the Republic? And there are a lot of great political philosophers today who are trying to think of ways, how do we break out of this two-party system? When Madison was framing the Constitution, he just wouldn't have thought in terms of majority and minority parties. Every party would have been a minority party. And that, I think, can go a long way to bringing down a lot of the political temperature in the nation. When you don't feel like your half of the country is pitted against the other half of the country. And Madison didn't say that we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I mean, he said, there's going to be a lot of political acrimony, but that's good. That's liberty working, and we can make that work for the system.